Hi guys, Tracy here with part 2 of my epic mixed media experiment. So last night I filmed the results of this part of my experiment. So these 2 pages, there are 2 more that I'm going to talk about today, but on these 2 pages what I did was I spread lines of various types of mixed media bases. So things like this one is gesso and matte medium, and gel matte is over here. And I basically just made a whole bunch of vertical stripes, and then I made a whole bunch of horizontal stripes that crossed each of those types of media. And then I had a look at how the different colors did, the different color products did on the different surfaces. So if you're interested in seeing the results of this part of this page, you'll have to check the previous video, which is called Epic Mixed Media Comparison, Bases and Colors. So check that out if you're interested in this part. The other thing I did yesterday was I spread a whole bunch of media. So this page includes all of these things. And then I also went to my supplies and pulled out a couple of other color media that I didn't include on this. And I wanted to see how different markers work on different surfaces, because that's where I tend to run into the most trouble, is figuring out which markers will go over which products, because usually one of my last steps is outlining and doodling, and I want to be able to know which products I can write on and which marker I need to reach for depending on what I've used on my page. So before I put away this, I did take the opportunity of having these media all out and dried, because it does take a lot of time to apply all of these media to a page and let them dry. So what I wanted to do was just test markers on some of the base products. Usually by the time I get to outlining, most of the bases have been covered with color, but every once in a while it's not, or every once in a while I want to write on one of the earlier layers. I didn't do an extensive test here, but I took the pens that I suspected would do the best, or that I was most likely to reach for. Most of them performed quite well on most of the media. So I'm going to talk in more detail about these results, and then I'm also going to talk about these results. So again, this one will probably be a very long one. I want to share with you guys all of the different kinds of pens that I have in my collection and that I draw for, and then I will show you one of the most interesting things that I did on this page, where I did the marker testing, is I tested it against water, all of these colors, and some of the markers I tested against with a water test, and so that has some interesting results. I'll show the markers on paper, and then I will also show you how they work over the different colored media, and when applicable, I'll also show you how those same markers perform over the different bases. Okay, so these are some of my favorite pens that I'm starting off with here. These are the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pens. These pens come in sets or individually. I bought a set that have these tips: brush, medium, fine, and super fine. And this is what the barrel looks like. These are filled with India ink. This is how the brush tip looks, and it is a firm brush tip, so it's not flexible like a paintbrush. It is more like a felt tip marker. And I do keep a separate Pitt pen in my mixed media supplies, because this tip does get broken down when you work on mixed media, like over lots of bumpy surfaces, and I like to have one that has a nice clean tip for outlining on my cleaner pages, like scrapbook pages and stuff, and then feel free to use the other one in my art journal. I actually have several of these in different places because I use them in lots of different settings. This is not a slick surface writer. This is how the other nibs look. So the other nibs look just like this, but just various widths. So this is the fine one, this is the middle-sized one. And it's again a firm felt nib on a metal tip. So these are my very favorite. I did test all three, even though they're the same markers with the same ink in them. It made sense to me to test the brush tip versus one of the other tips because the tips are different. And then once I got started, I sometimes find that these ones, because they have thinner nibs, they sometimes are more likely to get caught up in things. So I just wanted to test all of them because they are my favorite markers, and I just wanted to see them all in like down on paper for reference. So I'm going to show you not all of these, but I will show you the two main tips. So the Faber-Castell Pitt pen, and this is how this Pitt pen performs against various different media. So you'll see that it marks over pretty much everything. So this green strip here is Derwent Ink Tense. I will show these items just once as I go through it. If you want to see them in more detail, you can check out my other video, Bases and Colors. This is a pencil version of ink. So this is not a watercolor pencil, it's an ink in pencil format. Derwent Ink Tense, this is my new favorite product. Comes in these pencils, and this is how it looks. You'll see that the Faber-Castell Pitt pen with the brush tip easily marks over it. So that's the first line and the first set of X's. Then the orange is from my set of Koi watercolor pans. This is a very inexpensive entry-level water set. It's wonderful. It works really, really well, especially for the price. And the Pitt pen has no trouble over that. The purple is Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencil. And for all of these, I applied the product directly to the paper all the way down in lines, and then I just took a water brush and blended it out into the paper so that the far right side of each of these strips has highly concentrated pigment, and then as you move towards the left on the page, it's more and more watered down so that you can see how the markers mark over a watered down version of the product as well as a concentrated, like the pigment, the highly pigmented part of the product. So of course the Staedtler Pitt pen is stellar against the watercolor pencil. This is the Prima watercolor pencil right here. Same product, different brand, so of course the Pitt pen performs just as well. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus. This is watercolor in a liquid form. And again, I show these products in more detail in my previous video, so it works really well over that. Now this is Prima Water-Soluble Pastel. And these are very fun to work with, but they're oil-based, obviously, oil pastel, and this is the only oil-based product that I included because I typically never ever buy oil-based products. I just don't find them as fun to work with. They don't play as easily with, they will play with other products, but they don't play as easily with other products. And I don't usually want to have to worry about what sticks to what and that sort of thing, and what's okay to layer over or under something else. So as a rule, I don't typically mix oil products in with my water-based products, and I've just decided to do that just to keep my own mixed media life really simple. That's not to say that you should never mix water and oil. Go ahead if that's something that you want to incorporate into your mixed media supplies. I just find it more fun to not have to think about that kind of stuff. This is how the oil pastel, the water-soluble oil pastel from Prima works, and you can see that many of the markers really struggled on this media in particular. But the Faber-Castell Pitt Pen did hold its ground against the oil pastels. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. Now, one thing that I should have said before I even started is that whenever you're using markers over mixed media, it's essential that the mixed media is dry, really, really dry. Not just dry to the touch, like, yeah, it's dry enough, I can put another coat of paint on it, but like really, really dry, because these markers are not cheap and you will ruin the tips if you drag them through wet media. Sometimes you can recover from doing that. Like if I accidentally write in something that's too wet, you can just kind of go back and take your tip and kind of like get it running again and move it at different angles to try to like clean the crud off of the corners of it, and then it will usually get flowing again. But every once in a while you end up doing irreparable damage to your nibs, and that's not fun. Having said that, even when it's really, really dry, some of these media will still damage your nibs if you're not careful, especially if you've got like chunks of gelato or chunks of these softer media. Like these are pencil and water and powder based products. They're not going to cause as much trouble on your markers because they're already dissolved. But the things that can accumulate and not dissolve entirely and might have like a waxy substance to them, those are things that could damage your markers. So be especially careful with these upcoming 3 that I'm going to talk about. So the oil pastels, the Pitt Pen did hold up to it, but it struggled more on this than anything else, and I did wipe off my nib after I went through that part of it because I was just nervous about ruining my Pitt Pen. This is Distress Crayon. It looks like this, and it works a lot like a watercolor crayon. And the Pitt Pen took that like a champ, and the Gelato is a Faber-Castell color pigment product that looks like this. It twists up and down a lot like a Distress Crayon. These 2 products are very, very similar, and but different, and I talk a little bit about how they're similar and different in my other videos. I'm not going to repeat that here. And the Pitt Pen worked really, really well over the Gelato as well. The Pitt Pen worked over all of the other media that I worked on here. So this is Distress ink. This is Liquitex ink, the kind that comes in these bottles. This is Heidi Swapp Color Shine, and the marker does something interesting on this. It kind of the marker goes over it, but the glitter still shows through, like the glimmer in it still shows through. This is Dilutions, this is Mr. Huey's, this is Prima Chalk ink, this is Pigment ink, this is Ecoline brush pen. These are 2 other pens that I really just put here for the water test. This is a Stettler Tri Plus, and this is a Pitt Pen. This is Ken Oliver Color Burst, and this is Adirondack Color Wash. This is Glimmer Mist, and this is Smooch ink. And I just can't show all of these products, so if you're not familiar with any of these, let me know. If you want me to do an in-depth video about any of these things, just let me know. It's just beyond the scope of this one video. This video is going to be long enough without showing all of those things, but this is sort of like my secondary. I had my markers out and I thought I might as well test as many things as I can think of, so that's why I kind of went through and did this extra page. So that is how the Pitt Pen with the brush tip worked. I'm actually not going to swatch out all of these, but I will do the fine because it's the middle-sized one. And then this is the super fine. And this is the medium. If you follow my scrapbooking pages, then you'll know that I use these a lot for outlining and for journaling on my projects. They worked very similar to their big brother. So we've got the Faber-Castell, the 3 widths are right below, and they work pretty smoothly on all of these media right up until the Prima oil pastels. So none of those three worked in the oil pastels. They worked a little bit on the watery part, the part that doesn't have too much of the actual pastel pigment, but as soon as you got into the thicker pigmented part, they really don't work well at all. They worked okay on Distress ink or on Distress crayon and on gelato. And they worked, so these are these three right here. They all worked really well on all of these other media as well. So I'll just point out when something didn't work on these media, as opposed to going through each and every result. The next set of pens that I love and use often are these Micron pens. These are Pigma Micron by Sakura. They are waterproof and fade proof, just like the Pitt pens. And they have archival ink in them, and they come in different widths. So I have them in 0.05, 0.01, and 0.03. So it's really nice to buy a set of different widths like that for journaling, and I especially like having different widths when I'm scrapbooking because I might do all of my outlining in a certain width, and then if I have just a little tiny bit of a paper showing and I want to outline that one too, I'll take the finest tip and outline that one. This marker is pretty much equivalent to, I use these interchangeably with the Pitt pens, but I find that these pens, the tips don't last quite as long, so this tip will start to disintegrate a little bit sooner than the tips in these Pitt pens. This is how the barrel looks, and this is how the tip looks. Basically the same as the Pitt pens. So this is the 05, which is pretty much equivalent to the fine, I think, of the Pitt pens. So the Pigma Micron is the line and the X's that are right above my ruler, and you'll see that the Pigma Micron works as well as the Faber-Castell Pitt pens, especially the Faber-Castell Pitt pens with the same tips, so the three right above it. In all circumstances, it, like the Pitt pens, does not do well on the Prima water-soluble oil pastels, but it does really well on all of the other items. This is the Pigma Micron on all of these other media that I tested, and basically it goes over all of them. Very nicely, very smoothly. The next pen that I tested is actually a new one, but it is becoming one of my favorites. This I just bought on Friday. It is the Pentel Energel Liquid Gel Ink Pen. And this has a metal tip, and it's more similar to your standard ballpoint pen. It is a ballpoint pen. It writes very smoothly. It's a joy. It's very, very pleasant, and it doesn't smear. I give it a few minutes to dry because it is a gel pen, so it is quite liquidy. And I think because it's a gel pen and is quite liquidy, it tends to perform really nicely on mixed media. So let's have a look at the Pentel Energel. So the Pentel Energel is the line right above my ruler, and then the X is right above that line. And as you can see, it performs very, very well. There's only one slight place there where there's a little break in it, and that might have been just that I was drawing very quickly. It also struggled to go over the water-soluble oil pastels, so that's this green spot right here. And in fact, it became really goopy really quickly, and you can see it started to skid right there, It started to skip right there, and so I immediately had to clean it. It's a kind of pen that's very sensitive to wetness and getting clogged, so I just put a little note to myself, don't even try to use this one again on this media. It did okay, but it doesn't really stick very well to the Distress Crayon, and it did okay. And again, it didn't stick all that well, like it didn't come out all that dark over Gelato. I think if I were writing on Gelato or Distress Crayon, I would choose my Faber-Castell Pitt pen. Even the fine tip right here still shows very well, like it's a nice dark black, whereas this kind of starts to disappear once you get over on top of a more waxy substance. Here is how the Pentel Energel worked on all of these other media. So it did a fine job. It's right above the ruler. It did a fine job. It's nice and dark over all of these. So it's a great pen to use in your scrapbooking and in your mixed media. The next pen that I tested was the Sharpie pen. Most people are probably already familiar with this pen, although I did not own this pen prior to Friday. So I finally picked one up. I thought every time I go to get pens, I always think, oh, Sharpie pens, who cares about that? But I do really enjoy my Sharpie markers, so I might as well talk about Sharpie all at once. So normally I have Sharpie markers in the ultra fine point and in the fine points. These are wonderful markers to have in your stash because they will write on almost anything. They are slick surface markers, so they will write and almost instantly dry on plastic, on glass, on metal, and on like transparency type of stuff. So I have this packaging, for example. This is how the ultra fine tip looks, and it marks very similar to the other fine tips that look similar to that. So you see how I can mark on this plastic, and it doesn't bead up, and it dries instantly, and it's not going to wipe off. Then this is what the fine point looks like. It's not all that fine, it's kind of a bullet point. And it also marks, because I mean it's the same formula, just a different tip. And so it also is dry instantly, it sticks to shiny surfaces. And so because I can't find my fine point black Sharpie, I thought I would show you some of the other options that you can get in Sharpie markers. Now so far I've only been talking about, these are all Sharpie markers. I'll talk about the Sharpie pen in a second. So I already showed the fine point Sharpie marker. Now the thing about slick surface markers is that when you write on certain kinds of paper with them, they do tend to bleed out a little bit, so they're not going to give you as crisp of a mark, although it will work best on this kind of marker paper that I have right here. Like, let's do a mark on this mixed media paper. It kind of spreads out and doesn't stay quite as fine as it does on as a non-permanent marker would, or a non-slick surface marker. So because I can't find my regular Sharpie, my regular fine point Sharpie, I bought this retractable one. It's fancier than it really needs to be, but I think it's kind of cool, and I couldn't find a regular Sharpie, so I just bought this retractable one. It marks the same. It's also slick surface, of course, because it's a Sharpie marker. And then you can also get, this is probably the best of both worlds, it's the twin tip Sharpie marker. It has the fine point on one end, and it has the ultrafine tip on the other end. And so this I keep in with my mixed media stuff, so it's basically two markers that I use a lot in one. So that's kind of, instead of having this and this, I just have this. Now, you might be wondering, so how does the, so I have ultrafine point and fine point here, how does the Sharpie pen compare to the Sharpie ultrafine point marker? Because they look really similar. I mean, the pen has a metal tip and the marker has a plastic tip, but the nibs look pretty much identical, right? And when you mark them on paper, do look pretty similar. right there. They look pretty similar. But the difference between the pen and the marker is that the pen is a pen. And so although it will mark on this slick surface, and it doesn't bead up like some other products would, so it will mark, but watch, it also wipes right off. So it's not really a slick surface marker. Now if I were to write with my Faber-Castell Pitt pen, it starts to bead up right away, like it's very clear that it's not a slick surface marker, but the Sharpie pen might trick you because it looks like it's going to work on a slick surface. It has the word Sharpie in it, and so you might grab it and think, oh, I'll write on my transparency or on my glossy stickers, and then be disappointed when it smudges. So just be mindful that a Sharpie pen and a Sharpie marker, or ultra point marker, are not the same thing. Oh, so after saying all of that, I do want to show you how the Sharpie pen works. Very similar to the Micron, very similar to the Pitt pen. Not really similar to the Pentel Energel because it's not a gel pen. It doesn't flow it quite as smoothly. But that's how the Sharpie pen looks. So this is how the Sharpie pen works. It is right above my ruler, the line right above my ruler, and then the X is right over that line. And surprisingly, look at how it takes the oil pastels. That olive green section right there, it shows you that that Sharpie pen will mark over it, and it takes it like a trooper. It's pretty good. It marks over the Distress crayon, and it also marks over the gelatos. It also performs really well on all of these other scrapbooking supplies, so that is good to know. So Sharpie pen becomes one of my new favorites, along with these Pitt pens that I just enjoy so much. This pen used to be one of my favorites. You can buy these in sets as well. I have it in a set of 4 that has 07, 05, 01, 03. This was my first set of good markers for journaling in my scrapbooks, and it's waterproof, it's light fast, it's very nice, and it has a similar tip to the other pens that I've been comparing it to. It works very similar, and I do enjoy it on paper. It's still a favorite, but I reach for it much, much less. If you've followed me for a while, you know that Staedtler is one of my favorite brands of products. I absolutely love their Lumocolor for slick surface writing. I actually prefer the Staedtler Lumocolor over Sharpies, although Sharpies do have a better color assortment. And I'm very brand loyal. I love their Tri-Plus pens, their fine liners, and I love I love their erasers. I love most Staedtler products. This is no longer impressing me. I used to reach for it just mostly out of brand loyalty, and it did work well, especially on paper. On paper, it's really comparable to these other 3, right? So these 3 are pretty much interchangeable on paper. But when you start putting it on mixed media, the pigment liner really doesn't shine as well as the other 3 above it. So I know there's more than 3 lines above it, but in there is the Pentel Energel that you can't compare because it's a gel. But all these other ones are really similar to the Staedtler pigment liner, and yet the Staedtler pigment liner is just, see how it looks a little bit more faint in the green, in the orange, in the blue or purple, and in the blue. It just doesn't, it's not as bold. It certainly doesn't work in the oil pastel, but that's expected. And it barely sticks at all to that blue Distress crayon. And even the pink gelato, it really doesn't show up nearly as well as those lines above it. So the Staedtler pigment liner, as much as I want to love it, it's just not impressing me these days. So this one is dropping from my list of favorites, because I would rather, when you have these pens that work, they're in a similar price point and they work pretty much the same on paper, but they outperform it on other media. Why would I ever choose this one? So this is probably going to be the last of these that I buy, unfortunately. I am brand loyal, and it makes me a little sad. I wish I could have all the same products. That's my dream, I'm the same with Liquitex and Golden. I just want it all to be the same for some reason. Let's allow the Staedtler company to redeem itself here by talking about the Staedtler Permanent Lumo Color, which is my favorite slick surface pen. This is how the Staedtler Lumo Color looks. It's a lovely pen. It has the top tells you what the tip is. I really like a pen that tells you from the top what you're grabbing for, because I tend to store my pens like this, and so I like to be able to know what I'm reaching for. The Staedtler Lumo Color is my favorite slick surface writer. I don't know why I like it more than Sharpie. It's less stinky than a Sharpie, for one thing, and it just writes really smoothly on both paper and on slick surfaces. It dries instantly, just like the Sharpie. It doesn't have the same color assortment, so you can get these in colors, but not all those awesome funky colors that Sharpies come in. You can get it in at least 2 tips. I have them in fines and I have them in mediums. So the medium, I don't have a black in the medium, but the medium tip looks like this, and the fine tip looks like this. So this is the fine right here, and then this one right here is the medium. Like most slick surface markers, it does bleed out, so it kind of spreads. So this looks more bold, like a bolder point than what it really is, because as you do your markings, it kind of spreads a little bit on the paper. So that's the thing to keep in mind. I do love the Lumo Color. As you guys know, I reach for it a lot in my scrapbooking, and here's how it performs. Yay! Thank goodness Staedtler can redeem itself, because we have the Lumo Color here right above my ruler, which performs exceptionally well on lots of different media. It maintains its nice deep dark black color. It even works over the olive green oil pastels there that cause so much trouble for some of the other markers. It works really well on the Distress crayon and on Gelato. Works really well over all of these media as well. Many of the markers struggle to be seen through the glimmer that comes in the Heidi Swapp Color Shine. The ones that really stand out as being really vibrant even through the color mist are the Lumo Color, the Pentel Energel, and the Pip Pens in the medium and brush points. So Faber-Castell makes their Pip Pens in lots of different colors, and I got a couple sets. They sell them in different tips and in different colors. I really like these brush tip, these big brush pens. I only have it in black, but you can get these in different colors, and I kind of want to get them in the colors. I like these for a couple of different reasons, mostly because they're waterproof and they're colors. I got the warms and the cools for cool colors and for warm colors. These are all the super fine, so these are very fine liners. And I just wanted to test one of the colors and just see if it worked quite as well as the black ones, and I probably should have tested it up by the other ones so that you could really see the comparison, but it turned out they worked fine, so it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to test it to know, and now I know. There it is. The barrel looks the same as the black ones, but just colored, and the tip is the same, and the tops are the same. And I like how you can see the color and the nib size that you're reaching for when you look at it from above. That's very helpful. So this one is easy to see. I'll use my ruler anyways just for consistency, but it's the only red one on there. And as you can see, it performs really well. It even performs well on the oil pastel. So You follow that line all the way along and see that it performs really well on all of the different colored products. I mean, this is tone on tone, so it's harder to see, but it does actually write on the Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus. It even marks on the oil pastels, but I put a little note to myself to not use it on there anyways, because some of these will mark through the oil pastel, but it really goops up your tip, and so I had to clean the tip after I did that, and I just wanted to remind myself that just because it looks like this works on this product, I really don't want to ruin my tips and use it in it. Works fine on the Distress Crayon, works fine on the Gelato. And as you can see here, it works fine on all of these other media. As well. Next is the Sakura Jelly Roll, my favorite kind of gel pen. And this one surprised me by performing as well as it did. That's how it works. It's a ballpoint tip. And I like that the jelly rolls have lids that if you know the codes, you can tell what you're reaching for. So the regular jelly rolls have this regular opaque lid, but the ones with sparkles in them have like a slightly transparent lid with sparkles in it, and the ball sign pens have a different lid, but you can still see the colors. It's just really nice the way that they've consistently had the caps be what distinguishes between the different types of markers. I really, really like that about the Sakura Jelly Roll company. So this one performed really, really well, which I guess shouldn't be all that surprising because gel sits on top of things, so it makes sense that as long as you could get it on there, it would probably work well. So as you can see, it stays really vibrant and black, a nice dark, crisp black across all of those different media. So again, just to remind you, because I haven't been saying as we go, the bright green over here is Derwent Inktense pencils. This is my Koi, I'll try to hold this properly. This orange is my Koi watercolor pans. The purple is the Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencils. The green is the Prima watercolor pencils. The pink is the Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus. The olive green is the Prima water-soluble oil pastels. The turquoise is the Tim Holtz Distress crayons. And the pink is the gelatos. And you can see that it doesn't stick all that well to the waxier substances. So the oil pastels, the distress crayons, and the gelatos, it really doesn't work as well on, but it works fabulously on all of the other media that I tested. It also stands up really nicely to all of these other media, but it got a little bit, there was a little bit of skipping through the chalk ink. So it's this one right here. So the chalk ink seemed to really interfere with it a little bit, and then there was a bit of carryover onto the. I don't think that these would have affected it. I think it was still skipping from the chalk ink there. So that's good to know that Sakura Jelly Rolls will not go over chalk ink. A new favorite of mine, I've had this in my stash for quite some time. I got it from Jet Pens a little over a year ago, and maybe 2 years ago now. And this Mono Twin marker is, I don't know why I haven't, well, I can tell you why. It's oil-based, and as I mentioned, I don't love using oil-based products with water-based, or I just don't like using oil-based products. This is the Mono Twin. It has a 0.8 nib on one end and a 0.4 on the other end. It looks like this. So it has a plastic housing and a felt nib, and it's a firm point. It's not a soft brush. And then the other end has this really fine point with a plastic tip. And this is a Tombow pen. Love 2-in-1s. So because it's oil-based, it does have quite a smelliness to it. It does mark on slick surfaces, and it stays dries pretty much instantly. So these two bottom ones that are on my fingers, those are the two examples. It does dry instantly. This is how it looks on paper. So the two immediately above my ruler are the mono twin, so the heavier one on top and the thinner one on the bottom. They work marvelously on top of all of these media. Really nice dark coverage. Perfect. It does go over the oil pastels, but I wouldn't recommend it. The nibs were picking up some of the pigment here, and I was worried about my marker, so I added it to my do not use on oil pastels list. And it works really well on distress crayons and on gelatos, so it's a great pick for mixed media. The mono twin, for some reason I did 3. I didn't realize I had already done one, so the next 3 above my ruler are all the mono twin, and it goes with ease over these other scrapbooking media. The Pilot Multi-Ball. Now somebody, a YouTuber, a kind soul, sent me this in a rack a couple of years ago. She thought that I might want to try it out in mixed media, and I have been loving it. I haven't talked about it very much on my channel, but I do really love this pen. I think she said that it was kind of hard to get at the time, so I really do appreciate being sent these sorts of things to try, because I probably would have never tried this pen otherwise. I haven't seen it in my store, and it's not something that I would have tried online if I hadn't heard good things about it. So this is the Pilot Multi-Ball, and I will show you how it looks. I think she got it at Jet Pens or one of those online pen shops. So what's immediately obvious about this pen is that it has a much finer tip. It is a ballpoint pen, and it has a much finer tip than any of the other ones that I've done. So it has a much fainter line, but that is sometimes what you're looking for. It sticks really nicely. It works really nicely on pan water pastels, and to a lesser extent on the pencils. It works really well on the liquid watercolor, really not at all on anything that is waxy at all. So it doesn't work well on gelatos, doesn't work well on distress crayons, doesn't work at all on Primo water soluble oil pastels. But it is a really great, it works really well on paint too, I should say, which is not something that I tested, but I have used it on paint in the past. And it goes over all of these different scrapbooking products. So I already talked about the Sharpie pen and the Sharpie marker and how they're different, so I'm just going to very quickly, my Sharpie pen with the ultrafine point is getting worn out. This is how it looks. I've already shown the tip. It performs really well on the pencil and water-based products, and not so well at all in the more waxy products, so not in the water-soluble oil pastels or the distress crayons or the gelatos. Really didn't perform all that well. Well, it stuck okay actually to the gelatos, but the line didn't show up, so maybe not. Next, I did a water brush test. So I got my water brush really wet, and I smeared it across all of these substances to see, and then I blotted it with a paper towel to see how much of the product would react and interact with water. So the Inktense pencil, I really went to town trying to get this up, and it looks like some of it came up, but I worked really hard to get this up. I just wanted to see just how it would hold up. I did the same, so I kind of like really tried hard on these two. This came up, this is the Koi Pan watercolor, and it did reactivate and come up. The Stampin' Up! Watercolor pencil easily reactivated and came up. The Prima watercolor pencil also easily reactivated. The Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus didn't reactivate quite as much. The Prima water-soluble oil pastel came up like crazy. Like as soon as water touched it, it started dancing and moving around. The Distress crayons didn't really interact at all with the water, and the Gelato reacted a little bit, but not too much with the water. And I really kind of like, for all of these, I really like dug in hard with my water brush to really try to see how much they would move around. So if there's any small amount of movement, it's because I worked really hard, and I think that the ones that have the most movement, it's really obvious that they reactivated really quickly and easily. I was really curious about how the water test would go on these media, because these are the things that I use more in scrapbooking than for mixed media, although some of them I use in mixed media. The Distress inks, when it's dry, does not reactivate. The Liquitex ink, when it's dry, does not reactivate, which doesn't surprise me. I already knew that about that. The Heidi Swapp Color Shine does fade and reactivate a little bit with water. Dilutions reactivates big time with water. It almost disappeared here, and that is what it's known for. That's one of the qualities that people like about it. Mr. Huey's stayed strong through the water test. Prima Chalk ink wiped off pretty easily with water. The Mama Elephant pigment ink stayed pretty well. It did fade out a little bit with water. The Ecoline brushes are known, and that's one of their qualities, is, I'm going to show that shortly, but it is water soluble, so it reactivates. I wanted to see whether the Stettler Tri-Plus markers, which I use sometimes, I'll show that in a little while, whether it would react to water, and also the Pitt pens, I wanted to know if they would react with water, because I knew that they shouldn't, but I just wanted to test them, and neither one of them, especially the Stettler, this one reacts a little tiny bit. You get a little bit of feathering or bleeding with when you add water. The Ken Oliver Color Burst are obviously very reactive with water. They're designed to do so. The Adirondack Color Wash is very reactive to water, but the Glimmer Mist and the Smooch stays put even when you put water over top of it. Next, I checked out some paint pens. So I used the Pebeo Deco marker. I have reviewed this in a marker video at some point. I don't know if I talked about paint pens specifically, but this one marks on, this is a white one, and it really marks better. It doesn't work all that well on, might work better on this part because it's coated. It works really well on a non-porous surface as opposed to a porous surface. I'm not going to bother doing a test on here because you're not going to be able to see it. And it comes in different tips. This is the 4mm chisel, but it has different tips as well. And then the black one, I did this in the wrong order because I think I tested the black one first. This one is a 4mm chisel tip, not chisel, bullet tip. That's how they look on paper, and both of them work better on a non-porous surface or a less porous surface. Let's see how they do over all of this media. You can see that the demo marker in black stands out as really being quite bold over all of these media. Notably, it goes over the Prima water-soluble oil pastel really, really easily, as well as the Distress crayon and the Gelato, so no problem here. Also no problem over here, as we would expect, because these media are more sunken into the paper for the most part, except for those chalk inks. The white, you know, the white would show up really beautifully on acrylic paint, but it really, I think because even with these media on them, this paper is just too porous for this white paint marker to really show up all that well. It ends up looking a shade of gray, or just kind of like taking it down a notch. It shows up better on these waxy surfaces than it does on these ones that absorb into the paper easily. And similar results over here. white paint pens really shine on acrylic ink, on acrylic paint. Next, I did the Pen Touch, which is one of my favorite. It's oil-based as well, but it is one of my favorite paint pens for white. So you can see that it paints really, really well right there. The nib is similar to some of the other pens that I've shown you. It's a Sakura pen, and it is oil-based, so it's a little bit stinky. So the Pen Touch, you can see it on these colored media. It does stand up a little bit better on the waxier surfaces. Again, they're less porous, and these paint pens really do best on non-porous surfaces. The more porous or the more absorbed into the paper the media is, that allows this next media to also kind of soak into the paper, and these paint pens really don't do well in that kind of an environment. Some of these other products allowed it to shine a little bit better, so it shows up nicely on the Distress ink and on the Liquitex ink. It kind of disappears into some of these sprays, but it shows up really nicely on the chalk ink, which makes sense because chalk and pigment ink both kind of sit on the surface of the paper. It shows up well on the Eco line and well on the Ken Oliver. Next one is this Eco line brush pen. These are really fun pens. I have a whole set of them. These are actually from my set that I keep with me. I keep them by my bedside, and I also I bring them to work with me. I have them in lots of different colors here, along with my Stettler Tri-Plus fine liners. I use these for practicing lettering, and so I use these for practicing fine lettering, like just printing in my own handwriting stuff and maybe drawing. And I use these for brush lettering and shading and stuff. Not great for shading. But let's see. So let's see if I can actually do some brush. I don't really have the space that I need to do a great job, but it's Eco line. Okay, so I'm not really great at that, but you get the picture. There you go. And these have a real watercolory look to them. You'll see that they vary from dark to light, and this is ink that you can also buy this ink in little pots, like little things like this, little containers like this, but without an ink dropper on the top of it. And it's a watercolor ink, I believe. Or maybe it's just an ink. It's just an ink, I think. Brilliant Colors Concentrated Formula. So these are water soluble. So this is Eco line, and this is the water test. This is after it had already dried. You can really remove quite a bit of the pigment, and it smears around, and you can even see that the blue is still over here from there. So it's messy to work with in a mixed media setting, and especially if it's sitting on the surface. So if it gets a chance to absorb into the paper, then it stays put a little bit better. But if it's on top of something and then you add water to it, it will move around quite a lot. So on acrylic paint, for example, even I suspect if you were to put it on top of something like this and then wet it, it'll probably move around. Yeah, you can actually erase it. Good to know, hey? It has a soft, flexible brush tip, so it Let me see if I can show this. So it kind of moves. I like this brush tip. These are great brush tips for mark making on your mixed media. See how you can make that little teardrop so easily just by pressing the tip of the marker onto the paper. They're really fun to work with. But you have to be really, really careful in mixed media because they do react so well with water, especially when they're sitting on the surfaces of things. So as you see, it will go on to pretty much everything, but it won't necessarily stay put if you add either water or other wet substances over top of it. It will dance around quite a bit, but it looks good if that's your last thing that you're adding. Whew, we're almost done. The jelly roll white is my next thing. There you go. This is my new favorite white gel pen. It comes in the Freckled Fawn Mixed Media kit, and I asked for it to be included in that kit because it really is my very favorite white gel pen. I know that people love this one too, and I used to love this one too. I really do still love it. It gives a slightly more vibrant look than the Jelly Roll. So this is how the Jelly Roll looks on black paper, and this is how the Signo Uniball works. But I find that as the consistency of the Jelly Roll is so worth it because you don't get frustrated. See how this one is really jiggly? Like if you look at the S and the G, for example, how jiggly those look, that's because the Signo constantly skips. Unless if it's brand new, like the first couple of times you use it, it will always skip, and then you have to go back and fill in the skips, and it's just very, very frustrating. There's no doubt it gives a beautiful result, but the Jelly Roll is just such a joy to use. It's so smooth, it almost never skips. It's not quite as white, but it's white enough for me, so I really do enjoy the Jelly Roll. You'll notice I've got a whole bunch of samples here of white gel pens, and that's because I did a video all about white gel pens, so I'll link that in the information if you'd like to see that. So the white Jelly Roll works reasonably well over all of these media. You can't really see it because it's just not high enough contrast, but it does roll well over the colored pencil, over the not colored pencil, over the ink tents, over the pans, over the watercolor pencils. It works well on the Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus. Doesn't really stick all that well to Gelato's Distress Crayons and water-soluble oil pastels, like some of the other pens that I talked about. It's pretty similar to the other pens. Now, my last comparison, and this was just because it was there, I have this China marker, which isn't really a marker. It's like a waxy colored pencil type of marker. It looks like that. And it has this cool, I talk about it in my video where I talk about this. So it's called a grease pen by Sakura. It's also called a China marker sometimes. And it's so soft that it marks really nicely over everything, even the oil pastels. It's probably very similar in texture to the oil pastels, so it marks really well over them. It also marks over all of these substances as well, so that's nice to know about it. That's what a grease pen is really known for, is for being able to mark on pretty much anything. So that is my pen review. I just wanted to make sure that I show you how some of these pens work on the bases as well. I'll show you this is the Sharpie pen, this very top line, over the gesso, over the matte medium, over the fiber paste. That's the fiber paste right there. That's the light modeling paste. That's the natural sand texture. So there's a little bit of, I mean, that's really difficult to draw over, is the sand. The light molding, the light molding paste, the heavy gel. It goes on like butter on the other substances, like the matte gel, the glass beads, and the acrylic paint. Really, really beautiful performance. And then the next prize goes to the Pitt pen with the brush point, because that's that big bold one right above my ruler. It goes over all of those substances. It goes over everything over here, including the sand. It's the only one that goes over sand as well. So well worth it to have one of these. And this is so inexpensive. I think I paid like $3 or $4 for 2 of them at my art store. So well worth it to have these 2 in your stash, because the 2 of them, they're workhorses and they'll go through almost anything. Some other surprises here were the jelly roll. The jelly roll did amazingly well in lots of circumstances, so that's right above my ruler. Yeah, the jelly roll did well all across, except, you know, it got stuck in some of these more bumpy mediums, but it does well on multi-surfaces. And that Tombow Mono Twin also did really, really well. And the Sharpie marker did really well too. So some of the same ones that perform well over on the other substances will also perform well on the base substances. But I think some of the ones that are head and shoulders above the rest include these. So the Pitt pen in the brush, oh no, the Pitt pen in the brush point, not in the superfine. There we go. So the Pitt pen in the brush point performs really well lots of the time. The Mono Twin is oil-based and it performs really well. The Sharpie pen, the Sharpie marker as well. Where is it? The Sharpie marker that I don't seem to have anymore. And the jelly roll. They all work really well. I found my Sharpie pen. So that is my grand experiment on pens. I hope that you found this helpful. I know it was a lot of information. It's probably going to be another really long video. I will link some other videos about markers, because I've done several videos about markers now, and that way you can have a look at some of the other things that I've said over the years on this topic. So take care and have a really great scrappy week.